Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sync Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things OneDrive. OneDrive is the home for all of the files that you care about most, and we are here to take you behind the scenes to get the insights and the knowledge to make your experience and your users' experience better. As always, my name is Stephen Rice. I'm a Principal Product Manager here on the OneDrive team, and I'm joined by my fellow OneDrive aficionado, Arvind Mishra.
Hey everyone, I'm Arvind, and I'm also a Principal Product Manager on the OneDrive team. It is great to be back for another year of OneDrive improvements. Today's episode is all about the ultra-popular OneDrive Sync. From the basics you need to get started to the advanced tricks that'll make you the hero of your company, if that's even possible. You're probably already a hero. Who better to help us with this amazing topic than our very own Sync superhero, Gaia Carini.
Thanks, Stephen. Arvind, I'm so excited to be back here. I know it's been a while. I've been leading product for OneDrive Sync since 2019, but my journey with OneDrive started somewhere back in 2014, where we brought OneDrive Personal and OneDrive Commercial together into one team. And so, super excited to talk more about OneDrive and specifically Sync. And how we've been evolving our product to meet our users' needs.
Yeah, I am so excited for this topic. This is one of those ones where whether you're at a conference or office hours, there's no shortage of Sync questions. So hopefully this will become that one-stop shop. Well, the podcast is the one-stop shop for all things OneDrive. And this episode is
the seminal podcast episode.
The seminal podcast, yeah. Exactly. Now, but before we can do that, I want to have a little bit of fun with you both. We always like to have a fun question to kick things off. And since we're talking about the OneDrive Sync client, I thought, what is your favorite kind of sync? Not like Sync client, but what type of sync would you have in your dream kitchen? Arvind, kick us off here.
I don't have I guess for me, it'd have to be undermounted. I feel like the ones that are not undermounted, they feel cheap.
Okay.
But hey.
Okay, you like that sleek look?
Yeah. I like the sleek, clean look. I will say, speaking of sinks, when we did live in Seattle eons ago, we had in our master bedroom, we lived in this kind of redone house or whatever, and it was and some of it was kind of industrial, I guess. And we had this crazy sink in the master bathroom or whatever that was just one big trough. It was a metal trough. It was almost like something you'd see in a kitchen or something, but it was so big that we each had a side of the trough, if you can picture.
Interesting. That. Was it one faucet?
No, there were two faucets, but the sink, one sink.
Just stretched the entire countertop?
Exactly. And it was surprisingly practical.
All right, Gaia, favorite type of sink? What's your choice?
So in my kitchen, I have a single bowl sink. I think it's what it's called.
Classic.
But my parents have a double bowl one where they can separate things out. And I kind of like that, although I've only experienced it when I go home to visit them. But I think maybe in my next house, I might look into that.
What about you, Stephen? What are you partial to?
So we do have a double sink, and it is nice, but it ends up meaning you just have too little room on both sides effectively. Trying to wash dishes on one side, but it's kind of cramped. The other side is usually holding either clean or dirty dishes, but you can't hold as much. I'm kind of partial to a farmhouse sink, one, kind of the double wide you were describing, Arvind, where it's just a lot of room, nice and spacious.
Yeah, you can put a lot of stuff in there. A lot of dirty dishes can go in there.
Yeah.
I'll have to look up what a farmhouse sink actually is, but more room definitely sounds helpful.
Exactly.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
Hey there, Microsoft 365 fans. Have you heard the buzz? The Microsoft 365 Community Conference is coming to Las Vegas, May 6th to 8th, 2025, and you do not want to miss it.
Picture this. Over 200 sessions, mind-blowing keynotes, hands-on workshops, and even AMAs where you can pick the brains of top Microsoft experts and community leaders, probably execs too. Whether you're an IT pro, a developer, or business user, this event, it's got something for everyone.
This is your chance to learn, network, level up your skills, all while hanging out with the vibrant Microsoft 365 community. And as I mentioned, it is happening in Las Vegas, because who doesn't love a little bit of work and play in the city that never sleeps?
If you register now, you'll save $150 with the promo code SAVE150. Save 150. But don't wait too long because this early bird offer, well, it's not going to last forever.
Head over to aka.ms/M365Con25 to learn more and grab your ticket today.
So mark your calendar for May 6th through May 8th, 2025, and we'll see you at the Microsoft 365 Community Conference in Vegas. It's going to be epic.
And now, back to the show.
All right, let's get on to our main topic. Okay, so we are structuring today's conversation with a 101 and a 201 level set of information. So we're going to start with the 101 because that's kind of how my brain operates. I'm at the 101 level. Steven's at the 201 level. So Gaia, let's talk about the basics of sync. Now, I would love, since you have a lot of history with the team, I'd love to, have you walk us through like sort of maybe the history of sync and then, talk about obviously how it works today.
Yeah. So let me start with what OneDrive Sync actually is. So OneDrive Sync is the app that allows you to open and edit and share all your OneDrive and SharePoint files across both your Windows PC and your Mac. And it makes it super easy to interact with those files within File Explorer and Finder. And it's also the key way we support backing up files, for example, in your documents and desktop folders. And we'll talk more about that later for sure. In terms of history, Sync predates when I even joined the OneDrive team. There were actually multiple products that over time became what is known today as the Sync client. The most recent one being Groove. Some folks who might be listening will probably recall Groove. It's actually still out there for some on-prem versions, believe it or not.
Oh, wow. I would not have guessed that. I haven't heard Groove in a number of years.
Yeah, right. It's still out there until this year, I think. But anyways, yeah, over time, we had a OneDrive Sync client for the consumer product. We added support for syncing your OneDrive, and then support for adding SharePoint document libraries and other shared locations. So it's a long history, and lots of folks have been on the team for a really long time, which has been, fun to get to know them over the years.
When you talk about sync, I mean, because like we do, like at least in the consumer space, I know you like think about consumer and commercial, and we're going to mostly talk about commercial today. But like in the consumer world, we call it backup. That sort of conveys one thing, but we're talking about something that actually syncs files. Like your files are in both places at the same time, which is kind of a different definition than backup, right?
Yeah, for sure. So if you think about how sync actually works, I'll try to keep it 101 level, but it might be
101. My simple mind.
Syncing is always a very complex problem. So anyways, there's three main layers to think about. There's the cloud. Obviously, that's where, all the files are that you upload from any different endpoint, from your mobile device, from another computer. Then there's the file system. So like on your machine, on the OS, there's the file system. And that's where, the files live locally on your computer. And then there's the sync client, which has, its own database and a bunch of logic within it. And so if you think about when you add a file locally, let's say on your Windows machine, now Windows will emit an event saying, hey, there's this new file. The sync client will detect, hey, there's this new file. It'll upload it to the cloud, and then we'll store that information in our database once we know that it's successfully saved in the cloud. And then let's say you have your phone and you take a picture of something, it goes up to the cloud, and now we need to, sync that down. Again, we'll get a notification from the service saying, hey, there's this new file that was added in your OneDrive. And then we create the file on disk. And if applicable, we'll download the content, or we might just leave it as a placeholder of a file. And then again, we'll update our database and make sure it's tracked once we know it's actually on disk. So at a high level, it's like this process between these three different layers within the system: the cloud, the sync client, and the file system.
Right. And it makes my files always accessible on whatever device I want to access.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love how simply you explain that, guy, especially when like we all know there's an engineering team of like, I don't even know what it is now, like what, 60 plus people that
10,000 people.
I wish 10,000.
My God, cloud sync client file system. How hard could it be to keep files, in sync across all of those? And then I know we've got this amazing team of people that are responsible for making that happen quickly and securely, and reliably, and all the power that goes into it. Now, another thing I think we would be remiss if we talked about, you mentioned placeholders, which is like what was it, like the beta name or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But like files on demand is a huge part of the sync client experience, especially nowadays. What is files on demand for folks who may not know, and how does that work?
Yeah, definitely. So files on demand is available across both Windows and Mac, and it definitely changed completely how we think about sync, because instead of actually having to sync all the content of all the files onto your machine, we actually just have a version of the file that doesn't actually have all the content. And that way you're saving disk space, you're saving network space, all of that. And you can still access all those files. And then if you double click on a file, it'll just download to your machine. And if you know you're going to be offline, you're traveling, or you might be in a place that has bad network, you can actually proactively go and mark a folder, a file as always available offline, so it never gets cleaned up. Also, if you have a file that you might have opened previously, but you didn't mark as always available offline, we have this integration with the Windows Storage Sense policies, and those can go and clean up those files if they're not used within X number of days. So that, again, you're proactively just keeping your disk space nice and clean and not too full.
So wait, as a user with files on demand, do they automatically not download, or I have to tell them to not download? Like how does that work? Or is it set by my admin, or how would that work?
Great question. Yeah, it's enabled by default. So let's say, you get a new machine, you sync, you connect your account. By default, everything you have in your OneDrive will just be, kind of like a stub of a file, meaning it's just, you can see it, but it's not actually taking up any disk space. That's what we call internally placeholders.
Okay.
That's when it downloads. Now, if you add a file on, let's say you have that same computer, now you add a new file, that file will still be on disk unless it gets cleaned up later. So kind of depends on whether the files are in the cloud, then by default, they won't take up space. It's basically on by default.
Awesome.
Okay. I love how files on demand balances accessibility and efficiency. That's pretty cool.
Guy, like before we move on to kind of our 201, or is it 201 or 202? Whatever it is, the next section of our discussion. Like if I'm an IT administrator, I'm new to maybe M365, or I'm just working on, thinking about how I want my company to work. Why should I be using the OneDrive Sync client? What are the advantages it gives me over, a map network drive, or just using USB keys across all of my computers? Like what does OneDrive Sync give to me that makes this, such a powerful tool?
Yeah, for sure. So the Sync client is super valuable to make sure those users who might be used to, a network drive or just saving files locally on their desktop or in their documents folder, they can still stay within the context of File Explorer on their PC or Finder on their Mac. But all those files are now secure in the cloud. They can share them. They can access them through a mobile device or through another computer. So all of the benefits of the cloud come to those users on their local device where they might be used to working. And they can also continue to work offline on the go if they need to.
And I think it kind of goes without saying, I would imagine that like it's backed up in the cloud, which means that you're protected against things like ransomware and malware and those kinds of things. And so you even if you're from a usability perspective, you want your stuff instantly accessible, you still want it to be safe, I would imagine. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you can access version history and all of those things if something were to happen. So tons of advantages.
Nice.
All right, so let's move into OneDrive Sync Client 202. Now that you've sold me, I want this product, I want to be using it, but now I have to get it deployed across my organization. And man, that seems daunting. Like no matter if you're, company of 10 people, company of 1,000 people, it seems like getting this deployed would be a lot. So how do I get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, OneDrive is actually automatically installed with both Windows and with Office. So that gives you a great starting point to make it easy. You can also deploy it through tools like Intune. For Windows, actually, for the folks who are super familiar with our install, today it's installed by default as a per user version. So it's installed for every user profile on the Windows machine. And we've supported the per machine install for a long time. And we're in the process of making that default on Windows. So now you only have one version installed, which I know a lot of folks who are, familiar with this will be very excited about. And then for Mac, we actually have two versions. The standalone version, which comes again with Office or you can download from the site, as well as the Mac App Store version. Both of them are supported. In the context of an organization especially, we recommend using the standalone version because it supports, for example, the feature of backup or known folder move, which we'll talk about later. That's currently not supported in our App Store version. So definitely check that out. And then we also support virtualized environments, including non-persistent VDI and remote apps, as long as FSLogix is being used there. So that's kind of at a high level just to get it installed. And then in terms of actually, part of deployment is also configuring the sync client. And part of that you might have heard us talk about if you followed, some of our talks at different conferences, the OneDrive Sync ideal state. And that's a set of recommendations. I think right now we're up to 10 recommendations. And it's really designed to provide the best possible experience, both for end users, but also for admins when configuring OneDrive Sync. And so there's a lot more documentation of that at aka.ms/sync ideal state, which I'm sure we'll include in the notes.
Definitely.
Well, yeah, I think we'll touch on some of the key ones today for sure.
So, Guy, just to make sure I understand, is sync ideal state, it sounds like this is basically Microsoft's recommendation. Like if you want to get the most out of OneDrive, you should be following, all 10 or however many of these recommendations we have, right?
Yeah, exactly. If you want to have the best experience for your end users, which I assume everyone does, then definitely want to follow all of the different parts of the sync ideal state.
I mean, maybe there's like a masochistic IT admin out there somewhere who's like, no, my users must suffer.
Hopefully not, but
that person should maybe find a different job.
Fair.
I would imagine.
Yeah, right.
They're trying to do that. But hey, Steven, guess what?
What?
So I used to be the product manager for KFM way back in the day when it was not in the cloud. So I'm really excited to be talking about this with you, Gaia. KFM in OneDrive. Like, what is it?
Yes. Well, first of all, KFM has so many names, so I'll just mention them so everyone knows what we're talking about. KFM, also known as known folder move. That's generally how we talk about it in the context of commercial deployments. But if you look at our documentation for end users, it's called folder backup. So all of those names.
And it's called like Windows backup or file backup for consumers.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But basically allows you to back up key folders like desktop, documents, pictures to OneDrive. And it's basically super helpful to ensure that all the content in those folders is protected in the cloud. Users can collaborate and share that content, and all of the value, like we were saying, of OneDrive comes to all those files that are still, in those folders that users might be used to saving to on their machine.
Yeah, so the benefit again is like it's set up in a lot of cases, at least for consumers, for example, it's set up by default. And so your stuff is safe, it's in sync, it's accessible across all of your important devices, whether it's your phone or other PCs, what have you, but like it just automatically just happens for you.
Yeah, for sure. And then one other key advantage is for Copilot, we know how important files are, for grounding Copilot. And so just making sure as many files are there as possible is really helpful in that context too, with all the amazing new AI features we're building.
So, Guy, I'm going to put you on the spot, and maybe you have this up on the aka.ms/sync ideal state. Enabling KFM is recommendation number what?
Ooh, it is number 5, if I counted correctly, or maybe 4.
I think it's number 4 by my account.
Pop quiz failed.
I would have thought it would have been like number 1.
And maybe it should be. Good feedback.
Should be.
But to use KFM, Arvind, you have to be signed in. So how is it that I can make sign in as easy as possible, Gaia, for my OneDrive users if I'm an IT admin.
Non-masochistic one.
Yeah, so before you enable KFM, of course, your users need to be signed in. And that's where one of the other recommendations come in, which is silent account config. And that's really the easiest way to make sure that users are signed in with their Windows account. Otherwise, even if you enable KFM, they won't be signed in, and so nothing will actually back up to the cloud. And so when you enable this policy, as long as the device is joined to an Entra ID, the policy should take effect. Definitely recommend checking out our documentation because there's some guidance on, troubleshooting and some registry keys to check out if you're in the process of turning this on, which I won't go into today. And on Mac, you actually don't have to worry about this. It's enabled by default. And so if there's credentials from other applications like Office, then we'll just pick those up and sign you in automatically.
So are there like policies that you'd want to have different companies employ to roll out KFM?
Yeah, so the first policy is the silent account config, which we just talked about. And then it's actually about turning on KFM. And so there's multiple policies there. And again, check out our docs for way more complete summary. But we recommend the silent policy for the most seamless experience. And when we look at our data, over 99% of customers enabling KFM by policy are using the silent experience versus the prompt-based GPO. And for new devices, you can just go ahead and enable it. There's no files, so there's not any concern, about the load on the network and the load on the backend service. And so you can just go, an employee joins the company or an employee gets a new machine, KFM should be already on for them, and you can configure that. For existing devices, that's where there can be a lot of content, especially, for example, I've been at Microsoft for over 12 years. I might have a lot of content if I didn't already have it all in the cloud in OneDrive. And so you definitely want to make sure to stage the rollout in batches for existing devices. Go slowly, start with a small batch and expand, but really go gradually so that, you don't overwhelm both your network as well as the backend service. And then in addition to enabling the silent policy, we actually do recommend also enabling at the same time the prompt policy or the, opt-in with wizard policy, because that provides a good fallback with some UX in case there is an error that users have to address manually, then the prompt will be shown for them and they can resolve that on their own. There's also a policy that blocks opt-out. And so really, as you're rolling this out, this is something you want to do from a security perspective. Make sure all this data is safe in the cloud. You don't want users to be able to turn it off. And so we recommend also enabling the policy that blocks opt-out. And then last but not least, we have a policy that helps you configure, there might be certain file types like LNK files or PST files or other files like that you might not actually want to back up because they're not valuable in the cloud or they're specific to that machine. And so we have a policy to check out to do that.
Man, this is where that ideal state documentation feels like it really comes into play, because I may be at the 202 level compared to Arvind's 101, but I would still not be able to track all this. And having it all documented, here's the recommendations, here's what we should be thinking about, just seems like a massive benefit to any IT administrator.
You gotta opt in with your wizard.
I was going to make a pun about opting with a wizard, and that sounds like a lot of fun, like to have a wizard help me out with my files. But
Total, I want to hang with that wizard.
All right, so Guy, let's pick a real world example now. So I know you worked very closely with our Microsoft IT department to get KFM deployed. What were some of the best practices we learned from that experience?
Yeah, totally. So we had a pretty comprehensive strategy. We worked on user awareness. That was across both email as well as just other surfaces across, that IT generally uses to surface information about upcoming features being rolled out. We had to batch the users, especially given Microsoft is such a big organization, both across groups of users and across different geos. We tackled those in various batches. And then we followed the policies that I just mentioned. So the silent approach, blocking opt-out, et cetera. We did all of those things. And it really came down to, in addition to wanting to get all the benefits of OneDrive, it was really, we enabled it as part of this, a security push. We wanted to make sure all the files were secure in the cloud. Yeah. And then, we kind of split out users into batches of 5,000 users per week. And then we did special batches, for example, for execs, and then vendors also we kind of split out as a separate cohort.
Yeah, makes sense.
The last thing I'll note is in terms of how we actually deployed it within Microsoft, it's actually a mix of Intune managed devices and Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager managed devices. And so we deployed across both of those.
Awesome. And when it comes to all those kind of various policies you talked about, opt-in with Wizard, no opt-out, I assume Microsoft followed all those best practices.
Yes, exactly. Including using, the policy we decided to remove LNK files and PST files, like I mentioned. And then we automatically enable it for any new hire. So again, like they come to the company and they're all set up with KFM ready to go.
All right. Any other best practices, Gaia, when thinking about getting a KFM deployed?
So we talked about, making sure you roll out in batches, because this is really, especially with the existing content scenario, it really is a migration. So you should treat it like a migration you would from a file share. That's super important. We also get a lot of questions from customers who have the Windows redirection policies enabled and are trying to transition over from KFM. And so there's some recommendations there. Again, check out the documentation. I won't go into the details. And the Windows redirection policies, if you do want to support backing up other folders that we don't currently support, you can look at the Windows policies to do that. Now, they do require moving the content if there is content in those folders, but it's definitely an option. And then for Mac, make sure, again, to use the standalone version. And then there's a setting to allow full disk access that you can enable as an admin. And so you'll want to do that in order to make sure KFM on Mac gets enabled correctly.
Cool. More of the 201 information. So let's say you're following the best practices here and you're actually deploying KFM here. How do admins stay on top of how those deployments are going and make sure that it's running smoothly? I know you talked about batching, but there's probably more to it than just that, right?
Yeah, so we have a dashboard we launched called the OneDrive Sync Health Dashboard. It's within the Microsoft 365 Apps Admin Center. And that kind of gives you both an executive summary about everything happening with Sync, but also you can use it kind of, more proactively as you're rolling out or as you're trying to monitor the health of Sync in your organization. And so it allows you to answer questions like, which devices have errors, or what are the top errors within the company, or how is the KFM rollout going and who has it enabled for which folders, or even which devices are maybe stuck on an older build because something is preventing them from auto updating. So all of that data is available in the dashboard. And then last year, we brought the ability to actually export that data using the Microsoft Graph Data Connect. There's a very detailed step-by-step instruction that explains how to set that up, and you can check that out. And then the other thing that's coming soon related to these reports is that we're supporting GCC customers. That's going to be rolling out soon, and then we'll, expand that to the other clouds as well.
Okay, so we've talked about known folder move and how to get that deployed, Gaia. What are some of the other kind of key policies from the Sync Ideal State that our audience should know about?
Yeah, so I won't go into all of them because there's a lot, but one that I think is super critical, and actually I was just talking to a customer that didn't have this configured correctly, and they were experiencing a really poor sync experience. And so this one is super, super critical. And it's referred to as Windows Notification Service, or WNS. And really, this is a service we use both on Windows and Mac. And it's, when I was describing how sync works, I mentioned if there's a file in the cloud, we get a notification that there's something in the cloud that we need to sync down. Well, WNS is what allows us to do that. And so if we can't talk to the WNS endpoint, then that means we revert to our backup way of syncing, was just polling for changes. And that means it can take even up to, 15 minutes or more for a change to come down to the machine, which is obviously not a good experience. Instead, when WNS is configured correctly, it takes, it's almost instant, or takes like a second for a change to come down and show up on your machine, especially if it's a file on demand file that's not actually downloaded. And so this one is super critical. So definitely good to check out our docs about how to make sure the traffic is routed there correctly.
Yeah, that seems like a key one going to 15-minute backup or polling does not feel like the most efficient way to work.
Yes, not at all. Another great one is one we actually just added just recently, which is related to auto start. So today, OneDrive by default starts automatically when you log into Windows, but users or other kind of things can disable that. And so we have a group policies that forces that on so that, whenever you sign in, OneDrive will start automatically. And again, it's critical because then you can make sure that we're backing up your files, the user signed in, all of that kind of plays together really nicely.
Yeah, it's the type of thing. Like I know the team tracks, the various types of errors that our users see, and it's all just about, how do we go, get to the next 9? How do we make sure all of our users are in the best possible state so they get the most pristine, the most perfect sync experience?
Well, so hey, Gaia, at conferences, I feel like this topic comes up quite a bit, at least lately. And I'd love for you to sort of define the features in here as well for the audience. But there's this topic of synchronizing large document libraries, which a lot of our customers do. And they run in, depending on the size of the library, it's like 1 million files, they run into performance issues. But then there's also this new experience or newish experience that we're kind of promoting called Add to OneDrive. Can you explain what each of these things are and why one is the wave of the future and why the other one is not?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to talk about that. And we can come back to the scale topic because it's related, but we can touch on that later. So yeah, when we first, I mentioned we had the consumer sync client, then we added support for OneDrive commercial, and then we added support for syncing document libraries. Well, initially, when we added support for syncing document libraries, we followed this model that maps to what's called the sync button. So if you go into a document library or shared folder, you'll see a button called sync. And what that does is it syncs it to a separate location on disk. It syncs the whole namespace. So the whole library, even if you kind of click the sync button on a folder within that, we still keep track.
Or if I just wanted one file and it'll just sync the whole library, basically.
Yeah, well, it's only supported at the folder level. But let's say you have a folder that only has one file, but it's in this giant library. We're still keeping track of the metadata and all of the changes in that whole library. So that's kind of the old way that we implemented for syncing files, and it's specific to that device. So now let's say, right now I have my Mac, my Windows machine, I get a new machine. On all of those, I need to go back and find all those locations and click sync, and they're only available on that machine. Then we introduced Add to OneDrive, which is basically the ability of going to any of those, folders or libraries, and you can say add shortcut to OneDrive or to my files. And now that folder or that library will show up under your main OneDrive kind of node. And we'll start syncing it, but it's also accessible on mobile and on Office and in web, and everywhere you access OneDrive, you'll see that folder because it's important to you. And then back, related to the large libraries, the other thing we did is when we implemented that feature, now we only keep track of the metadata and changes for that specific folder that you added to your OneDrive and not the whole giant library. And so if you are syncing at a lower level of the tree in a document library, it definitely has some major performance advantages too.
Okay, but so in the case of the former technology, just syncing, so yes, someone like myself with one-on-one knowledge would accidentally sync an entire document library of hundreds of thousands of files when I only wanted one folder. In this new world, when I add something when I use the Add to OneDrive feature, is it adding the file itself, or is it adding like a link to the file, or how do I think about that? Is it the actual content that I'm getting and I'll have it available offline, or do I have to do something else, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the behavior of the actual folder you want to sync is the same because you'll still have that folder available through File Explorer or Finder. You can still, Files on Demand works for all of those files within the folder. So behaves as any other file you're syncing. It's just where it shows up is different. And the way we kind of have implemented it is better in a bunch of ways, like I mentioned. But yeah, definitely recommend it. And you mentioned, people might accidentally click the sync button. eventually we do think, the sync button, I know we've talked about it in the past, but it will sunset. I don't have a timeline yet, but it's definitely something that's top of mind. Right now, we've listened to a lot of feedback from a lot of you who are listening and from office hours and conferences and all of that. And we know there's some feedback we need to address first related to the Add to OneDrive feature. And so that's what we're really focused on now. And we actually have the first set of improvements rolling out this quarter, which is really exciting. Once we've addressed the top feedback, that's when we'll go back and figure out the plan and the timeline for removing the sync button. But in the meantime, if you want to disable it, we do have a PowerShell commandlet that removes the button for the whole tenant.
Got it. So just to recap, Gaia, long term, the goal is to deprecate the old sync button, not the sync client.
Yes. Sync button. That's super important.
Encourage folks to use Add to OneDrive. That's not currently, there's no timeline for that. And I have to imagine when that time comes, when we feel that we've addressed all the feedback about Add to OneDrive, this isn't a like, hey, surprise, sync button goes away tomorrow. There's a process involved, right?
For sure. Yeah. We'll make sure to, do all the change management and notify everyone and give ample time for awareness to all of our admins. So yeah, that's definitely top of mind. And, I mentioned we're rolling out some changes to address some of the feedback. One example of that is today we got feedback where if you have multiple shortcuts that have the same name but are from different locations, it's kind of confusing to tell them apart. And so we actually have a new default naming scheme rolling out very soon that will always include the site name and the folder name in the shortcut. And so small things like that, I think we actually think will make a big difference based on a lot of the feedback we've heard from customers. But there's more to come, so stay tuned.
Awesome. If I'm interested in learning more about Add to OneDrive versus Sync or the Sync button or some of those changes that are coming, what are the best places for me to learn about those things?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely, office hours will definitely cover this topic as we have more to share as some of these improvements roll out and we have the more details on the sync button plan. And then, continuing to look at our documentation. We'll add in the show notes the place where you can check out where to disable the sync button. And so you can check that out as well.
Perfect. And then I have to imagine if you happen to be at like Microsoft 365 Community Conference coming up in May, that'll probably be more news and things to learn about there as well.
Yeah, I can't wait to share more.
Nice. Okay, so that was a pretty big deep dive into something that we know is pretty important with our customers. What about what's coming up? Like what's new? Like, are there new features that you can talk about that aren't, secret?
Yeah, so I can share some of the recent features that either shipped or are shipping soon. Let's start with Mac first. So we shipped a change recently that basically removes the notion of an invalid Mac file or folder name, which is exciting because we know that was basically one of the top, if not the top pain point for a lot of our Mac users and admins. So for example, characters like colon and question mark and, the star sign, all of those now can get uploaded to the service and we encode them in a special way that allows them to also sync on Mac and go up to the service. But users will no longer see an error and the names will show up correctly on Mac. And then we're also we automatically trim trailing spaces, which was surprisingly common and most users likely didn't even notice. And so now we're just fixing it for you. So just trying to remove some of the top errors that people were running into.
See, those are the types of fixes where not something I've ever experienced, but I have to imagine if you were one of those users that, you really liked your trailing question marks and naming your files with questions like Arvind, I don't know, spec question mark or whatever it might be. It's just the type of thing that just
exclamation mark.
Fair. Exclamation mark's a little bit better.
Yeah. I feel like I did put punctuation on the end of a lot of my files on Mac. So
yeah. And some applications use it as well by default. So
that's always fun. All right. What else is new on Mac?
Yeah. So we also added some additional signals. For example, if OneDrive isn't running within Finder and, some notifications. So really to make sure, like we were talking about earlier, OneDrive is always running and signed in. That's super critical. And then the most exciting is external drive support. So when we were updating our Files on Demand implementation to adopt a new set of APIs a few years ago by now, we had to remove external drive support based on what was supported. And now we've actually reintroduced it, which is really exciting. We know a lot of our fans out there really use this functionality. And so, yeah, hopefully they're really excited to see it rolling out to insiders first, and then we'll roll it out to prod.
Awesome. What about Windows? If I'm a Windows user, what goodies do you have for me, Gaia?
Yeah, I have a bunch. So actually, let's start with Windows 10, which I know hopefully most people are on Windows 11, but we know there's still folks on Windows 10. We've added kind of a simplified version of our File Explorer flyout capabilities that shows sync status and quota and all of that information and errors to File Explorer in the ribbon on Windows 10. So for user, you won't get the full experience we have on Win 11, but still, more visible than what we have today on Win 10. So very excited about that. And that's fully rolled out. We've also added the ability to personalize folder colors and view those colors across both Windows 10 and 11. And that's super exciting.
Gotta love colored folders.
Yes.
Colored folders always gets applause. Always gets applause.
And then if you take a look at File Explorer Home on Win 11, you'll see right now it's still in insiders and we'll be rolling out to production/retail in the coming months, is broader set of file types. So for example, Designer and Power BI and Loop. And then also the ability to see shared files directly from File Explorer, which is really exciting. And then finally, we also rolled out, we've had a lot of feedback in the past about people accidentally deleting files. We know there's more to do here, but one thing we recently rolled out is when you delete files that are in a shared location, we'll inform users on Windows that they would be deleting those files for everyone, and we ask them if they want to confirm that or not.
Nice, because I delete all the files that I've shared with Steven all the time, and then he's like, where did they go?
Okay, well, you have to tell me if these warnings help you or not. I'm sure we have more.
I say, Arvind, that's why you're a 101 kind of OneDrive Sync client user.
Well, I feel like after today, I'm at like 102. Come on. I feel like I've learned quite a bit.
Guy, this is awesome. I think very, very clear that the team is very busy. And there's just so much good stuff coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, we're super excited. We want to make sync more reliable, faster, and easier to use. And yeah, I showed you I talked about some of the features that are shipping or have shipped. But we have a lot more that we're working on. And I'm really excited to share more news at the M365 conference in the spring.
Cool. Well, hey, Gaia, just want to say thank you for joining us today. This was a great conversation for myself because I feel like I learned a lot, and hopefully our audience did as well. But if people want to find out more about you or connect with you out in the social ecosystem, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I should be the only Gaia Carini, so it should be pretty easy to find me.
All right. That is fantastic. Thank you again, Gaia.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you want to learn more about OneDrive and get the latest and greatest, check out the blog at ak.ms/OneDrive/blog. You can join the OneDrive office hours that Gaia mentioned. We are all always there. It is one of my favorite meetings of the month. That is aka.ms/OneDrive office hours. You can find me at LinkedIn at srice08 and Arvind at ArvindMishra1.
As always, we love hearing from you, our listeners. Send us questions by emailing syncupquestions@microsoft.com. You can visit our page for links, resources, and more at aka.ms/syncup.
Don't forget to subscribe to Sync Up wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy it or find it useful, tell your friends. Word of mouth is the best way for us to grow the show, get people engaged. And if you're curious about other Microsoft podcasts, be sure to check out aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts. And as always, a huge thanks to Lisa for making this podcast possible.
Thank you for listening to Sync Up. We have been your hosts, Steven and Arvind, and we will catch up with you next month.